If this is the way it goes down, the New York Rangers might never survive the season. Because today, we are going back over to The Athletic, where Chris Johnston and Pierre LeBrun went out there with their NHL Trade Matchmaker series. This is a pretty self-explanatory article. They go out there and talk about teams that could target players, and they make their predictions, of course, they being LeBrun and Johnston, some of the most renowned insiders on TSN. This is part 2. In the first part of their article, we already went over one of the ideas that was discussed. Chris Johnston predicting that Seattle Kraken center Yanni Gourde would find himself in Vancouver. But in this video, we are diving into yet another Chris Johnston Canucks prediction, because it's not only Yanni Gourde of the Kraken that he goes out there and predicts Vancouver could target, but it's actually somebody else who is a former Kraken too. Let's go out there and dive into this article. Actually, not the article. We'll leave a link in the description to the article if you want to go ahead and read it yourself. It's on The Athletic. It's behind a paywall. But to help us out with this conversation, we're heading over onto NHLTradeTalk.com. Because a recent piece published on the website dives into the same ideas. This was by Jim Parsons on December 27th, 2024. NHL Trade Talk recapped the Red Wings, Oilers, Canucks, Jets, and Flyers. It's very vague, but what Parsons goes out there and does is links this. Might the Canucks outbid teams for defenseman Will Borgen? It's not clear that the New York Rangers will be sellers, but if they are, it's possible Will Borgen attracts a lot of attention. And if Borgen is made available, Chris Johnston of The Athletic thinks that Vancouver's front office would aggressively pursue someone with Borgen's skill set. Johnston writes, Borgen will have plenty of suitors ahead of the deadline, but there may not be anyone more motivated to pursue him than Vancouver. Now, of course, that's the short and sweet version of it. No Sabrina Carpenter up in here, sorry, but there is a little bit more of a write-up in the Athletic article if you wanted to dive into that yourself. Johnston pretty much just says that Vancouver could use this guy. He's a defenseman, he's a stay-at-home defenseman, and he is a good skater. But what I really wanted to talk about was just the story of Will Borgen, how this has gone to the point that it's at right now, and what this would look like not just for Vancouver, but for New York too, if Borgen found himself on the trade market once more and he was sent over to Vancouver of all teams. Firstly, this would be a very strong addition, in my opinion, to what the Canucks could bring. 28-year-old guy, 6'3", 205, right-handed defenseman, signed on till the end of this season, making $2.7 million a year. The contract is pretty reasonable for a guy who's roughly in that 18-ish minute per night territory. Now, that's kind of what he's been deployed at in New York. In Seattle, he was more so in the 15-minute territory. But realistically, if you think about the Canucks, with Hronek back, obviously you wouldn't really need somebody to go out there and get 20-plus minutes a night. But for now, because Hronek is out and because he's going to be out, I mean, we can assume that if Borgen gets acquired by Vancouver, he would be a first-pairing guy, maybe a 20-plus minute guy by default, alongside of Quinn Hughes, assuming Hughes is healthy, of course. But I spoke about this in the last video wherein we talked about Borgen, but I've always been a fan of him and his game, mostly because for me and my banger fantasy leagues that prioritize hits and shot blocks, Will Borgen has always been a pretty solid addition, especially last year. That trio of him, Jamie Oleksiak, and Adam Larsson were absolute tanks, some of the best players in my entire gosh darn league, and it wasn't even close. It was ridiculous. Thanks, John from Hot Take Hockey, for setting up the league the way that he did. But anyways, Will Borgen was a defensively responsible shot-blocking guy. And I guess if you're Vancouver, hey, you just played off against the Seattle Kraken yesterday. Obviously, Borgen wasn't there, but you've been playing off against Seattle quite a bit the past few years. Borgen was always in that system ever since being acquired by Seattle from the Buffalo Sabres organization. So there was probably some sort of exposure here that led Patrick Allvin and Rutherford to identifying him as a valuable defensive option, and if the Canucks are in the market for a shutdown right-handed D, Borgen could certainly be in that territory here. For the New York Rangers, though, this is where things get interesting, because Borgen, of course, is not a Kraken right now. He's a Ranger. He was sent over to New York in the Capo Caco trade, and if you consider Borgen's sort of potential where he's at right now and what it could fetch in some sort of a trade, Let's assume the Rangers retain 50%. 50% salary retained, so $1.2 million a year for Will Borgen. Going over to some playoff caliber team, maybe it's Vancouver, maybe it's not. If you trade away Will Borgen for like a first round pick or something, you would have essentially traded away Kaapo Kakko for that price. Heck, if Borgen doesn't even go for a first round pick, he goes for less, then that's your return for Kaapo Kakko. Borgen already is on an expiring deal, so Kaapo Kakko getting traded for him was already kind of a reach. I know I said in the YouTube video wherein we talked about the trade that I was actually a pretty big fan of Borgen, and the trade isn't as lopsided as many Rangers fans are making it out to be. But if you trade Borgen away for scraps, then all of a sudden this Kaapo Kakko trade becomes even worse to look at on paper. And that's not because Kaapo Kakko is super amazing, it's just there was value attached to that asset. A second overall pick who had the progression that he did. People still believe in this guy, others don't. Kaapo Kakko is in a pretty rough spot in his NHL career, which is why he needed to get sent over to Seattle in the first place. Now, I also get it. Chris Johnston is taking the easy bait here. It's very easy to just say whatever right-handed defenseman on the market is going to be targeted by Vancouver because the Canucks have so few of them right now. I mean, at this moment, they've got Tyler Myers, they've got Noah Juleson, they've got Mark Friedman, and then everybody else in the mix too. Very difficult to project what the team looks like without Hughes and Hronek, but for now, Will Borgen is a name that I thought was interesting enough to talk about, and it's also kind of funny because in the last article, too, Chris Johnston talked about Seattle Kraken forward Yanni Gourde. Now it's former Seattle Kraken defenseman Will Borgen. Not to mention Daniel Sprong going from Vancouver to Seattle earlier this season. There could be a lot of Vancouver-Seattle action if things go down the way Johnston is predicting, although, of course, we recognize that these trade articles almost never go down the way that the articles project they will. It's never really that consistent, so we'll see if Will Borgen does get traded. If the Rangers start winning games, if they just become competitive again, if they get into the playoff picture once more, then this entire Borgen thing, it's not really a thing. They'll keep the guy, they'll play him in a shutdown role, they'll give him 18 minutes a night because the Rangers are kind of ass right now, and they'll continue into the wild card, maybe even top 3 in the Metro, do their damage in the playoffs, try to make the third round once again like they have been doing for years, and that's it. If they start to win, there is no reason to trade this guy away, and that's ultimately the conclusion that Rangers fans want to see. They want this guy to provide value to the team, and in a meaningful, competitive way. It's just, if the Rangers still stink, you have nothing to lose by trading him away one more time, and by proxy, devaluing whatever it is you got for Kaapo Kakko also. So maybe that's not all too ideal, but for the Rangers fan base, let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. It's kind of weird. We're seeing all these Ranger Vancouver Canucks articles. Oh yeah, right, because it's the biggest topic on the market right now with JT Miller trade talk running wild. JT Miller, Chris Kreider, Will Borgen, Alexis Lafreniere even in the last video. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. I hope you enjoyed this video. And bye.